Okay, let's unpack this. We are launching into a deep dive on one of history's really great paradoxes, Amerigo Vespucci.
Hmm.
I mean, his name is literally etched across two massive continents, America, yet for centuries, his actual accomplishments, um, even the number of voyages he took, it's all been fiercely disputed.
It's such a fascinating contradiction, isn't it? It perfectly captures that messy transition from the Middle Ages to the modern world.
Right.
You've got this Italian merchant trained in humanist philosophy who then becomes a ship supplier in Spain.
Yeah, of all things.
And his fame, the thing he's remembered for, is cemented by a German cartographer printing an opinion in France.
Yeah.
He's right there at the nexus of exploration, commerce, and the revolutionary power of the printing press.
Absolutely. So our mission today, looking through this fascinating stack of sources we have, is to really unpack the notorious Vespucci question. Was he truly this brilliant intellectual navigator who first grasped that he'd found a fourth continent, a new world? Or was he, as one famous detractor, Ralph Waldo Emerson, acidly put it, just a thief and a pickle dealer who stole Columbus's glory?
And that's the question we're going to trace. We'll look at the verifiable voyages, the Spanish and Portuguese ones, and then dig into those highly contentious alleged voyages.
The ones that cause all the trouble.
Exactly. And the incredible, almost accidental story of how a series of widely circulated letters that were likely fabricated or at least heavily edited, ended up naming half the globe. It's a story that starts not on the high seas, but in the political and cultural heart of the Renaissance.
So let's begin right there, with his improbable start in Florence. Let's see how his elite connections set him on a trajectory that went far, far beyond simple commerce. So, Amerigo Vespucci. He was born in 1454, just outside the walls of Florence, in a suburb called Peretola. And you have to remember saying Florence in the mid-15th century.
It's like saying Silicon Valley today, but for the Renaissance.
Exactly. It was the absolute epicenter of art, finance, learning, everything. And while the Vespucci family wasn't, say, the top tier of wealth like the Medicis.
No, but they had something just as valuable.
Connections.
Deep political roots. They were completely entrenched in the powerful civic machinery of the Florentine Republic. His father, Nastasio Vespucci, was a respected notary for the Money Changers Guild. But the real leverage, the real power, came from their connection to the Medici family.
Specifically, Lorenzo de' Medici.
Lorenzo the Magnificent,
No?
the de facto ruler of Florence, the ultimate patron of the arts, and really the power behind the throne. The Vespuccis were in his orbit.
And you can't overlook the family legacy either. I mean, Amerigo's grandfather, who was also named Amerigo Vespucci,
Right.
he held the position of Chancellor of the Florentine government, the Signoria, for 36 years.
36 years. Think about that. That kind of political and bureaucratic longevity is astounding. It tells you the family was seen as immensely stable, trustworthy, even as political winds shifted.
It's a kind of built-in credibility.
It gave young Amerigo automatic access to elite circles, to opportunities, even if his own career path was a little unconventional.
And speaking of those elite circles, get this. Here's a fantastic little detail that just anchors him so firmly in that high Renaissance life.
Oh, I think I know what you're going to say.
His cousin, Marco, was married to Simonetta Vespucci,
The legendary beauty.
the one who served as the model for Venus in some of Sandro Botticelli's most famous paintings.
So he was literally related to the face of the Italian Renaissance. It's an incredible social backdrop.
It is. So even if he ends up in logistics and cartography, this is his world.
And it sets the stage for his education, which was fundamentally different from the path his older brothers took. They went the traditional route to the University of Pisa.
But not Amerigo.
No. Amerigo was tutored privately by his uncle, Giorgio Antonio Vespucci,
Right.
a celebrated Dominican friar and a very serious humanist scholar. This was a top-tier, bespoke education.
So this meant he wasn't just learning, I don't know, accounting or business skills.
Not at all. His curriculum was broad literature, philosophy, rhetoric, Latin. But crucially, his uncle exposed him to the cutting-edge sciences of the day, geography and astronomy.
And that's the intellectual base that really sets him apart from so many of the other practical navigators of the time, isn't it?
Precisely. His later writings, even the ones people dispute, show this deep intellectual curiosity and literacy. He wasn't just a guy looking at the stars to find his way.
He was engaging with the texts.
Yes. He knew the classic Greek cosmographers, like Ptolemy and Strabo, whose theories had dominated Europe for 1,000 years. And he was familiar with contemporaries, like the Florentine astronomer Paolo dal Pozzo Toscanelli,
Who was the one who famously advised Columbus that he could reach Asia by sailing west?
the very same. So Vespucci had the intellectual tools not just to see the world, but to interpret a potentially revolutionary new physical world. He had the framework.
He had the theory, right? But he needed a practical career. And his first shot at high-stakes diplomacy didn't go so well.
No, it was a bust. In 1478, he joined another uncle, Guido Antonio, on a mission to Paris. They were trying to secure French support for Florence's war with Naples.
And it failed.
Utterly. By 1481, the mission was over. So high diplomacy wasn't for him.
So what did he do then?
After his father died, he returned to Florence and went to work directly for Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco de' Medici, a cousin of Lorenzo the Magnificent. He was basically a household manager, handling business dealings.
A pretty significant step down from international diplomat.
It was, but it involves serious financial and logistical responsibility. And we have evidence of his growing obsession with geography around this time. He spent a considerable sum of money to acquire an expensive, very detailed map from a master cartographer, Gabriel de Fonseca.
So the interest was already there. He's the sophisticated businessman with an intellectual obsession with maps and distant lands.
But Florence, the political and economic scene was becoming a bit restrictive for him. The crucial pivot, the big change, happens in 1488.
He's sent to Seville.
Yes. Dispatched to investigate the Medici's business agent there. He ends up staying and working with the replacement, a man named Gianotto Berardi, who was a high-risk Florentine merchant.
And Berardi's business model was, well, it was fascinatingly modern and also pretty grim.
It was. He was heavily invested in African slavery and, more importantly for Vespucci's future, in ship chandlery.
Okay, let's pause on that. For anyone listening who's unfamiliar with the term, what exactly does a ship chandler do? And why was that job so critical in Seville in the late 15th century?
A ship chandler is the ultimate logistics supplier. They provision the ships with everything: food, water, salt, gunpowder, spare sails, tar, anchors, you name it. They also hire the crew, secure the financing.
They make the voyage possible?
They're the indispensable backbone. And Seville, by 1492, was the undisputed hub of Spanish global ambition. It was the jumping-off point for all the Atlantic voyages. So Vespucci goes from being a cultured Medici manager in a somewhat stagnant city to being a strategic supplier and financier for the most ambitious global ventures in the world.
He was literally right there supplying the engine of the Age of Discovery.
Absolutely. The connections were immediate and they were deep. Berardi's firm was directly involved with Christopher Columbus.
How involved?
Our sources say Berardi invested 500,000 maravedis, a massive, massive sum, like several fortunes, in Columbus's very first voyage. And later, he won the incredibly lucrative contract to provision the huge Second Fleet, the one with 17 ships.
Wow. So this wasn't just some intellectual curiosity for Vespucci. It was a high-stakes, high-risk gambling business.
It was, and that financial risk hit Vespucci directly. Berardi died unexpectedly in 1495, leaving Vespucci as the executor of his chaotic will.
Oh, that sounds like a nightmare.
It was. Vespucci spent years trying to collect debts, pay off obligations, keep the firm solvent, and despite his best efforts, he was left personally owing 140,000 maravedis. So he was right in the thick of the financial chaos and the risk that underpinned all of these explorations.
So, despite all that financial turmoil with the Berardi estate, Vespucci makes a really crucial move to solidify his standing in Seville, which just points to him being an excellent political operator.
He was. He married a local Spanish woman, Maria Cerezo.
And this was almost certainly a strategic marriage, not just a romantic one.
Almost certainly. We know surprisingly little about Maria herself, but Vespucci's will strongly suggests she was the daughter of the celebrated military leader Gonzalo Fernandez de Córdoba.
The great captain.
The great captain, a figure of immense influence in Castile. For an Italian immigrant trying to establish legitimacy, social position, some protection in this volatile Spanish society, a connection to a family with that kind of military pedigree was priceless.
It sounds like his time in Florence gave him the education and the connections, but the move to Seville, that gave him the financial risk, the logistical expertise, and the politically necessary marriage to actually get himself on a ship.
That sums it up perfectly. He was prepared not just to sail, but to interpret what he saw. And he had the necessary local protection to survive doing it.
And this is where the legend of Amerigo Vespucci really begins, but it's also where the history just fractures into all these conflicting accounts.
It gets very messy very quickly.
The evidence for everything he did from here on out rests almost entirely on a handful of letters. And the veracity of those letters has been debated for 500 years.
Right, so we have to navigate the 4 alleged trips by talking about the 2 known voyages and then the 2 highly contested alleged voyages.
This controversy is really the core of it all, isn't it? It's why his name is famous, but his reputation is still questioned.
It all boils down to a race against Columbus. The 2 voyages that spark the most historical fury are the ones that, if they were true, would mean Vespucci reached the mainland of the Americas before Columbus ever did.
Okay, so let's start right there with the big one, the alleged first voyage, supposedly from 1497 to 1498.
This trip is detailed exclusively in the Letter de Soderini, which was published much later, around 1505.
Okay.
The letter claims Vespucci left Spain on May 10, 1497, and returned in October of 1498.
And if those dates are accurate?
He would have touched the continental mainland of the Americas a full 3 months before Columbus did, on his 3rd voyage in August 1498.
And that's the claim. That's the one that drives the whole historical debate. But what makes scholars so skeptical about this account? I mean, beyond just the convenient timing.
Well, the specifics described in the letter, the actual geography, just don't add up.
How so?
The alleged course starts near what we now call Honduras and then proceeds northwest for 870 leagues. Now, that distance is roughly 3,190 miles, or over 5,000 kilometers.
Okay. So where would that have taken them?
That trajectory would have taken them clean across the entire breadth of Mexico and into the Pacific Ocean.
Which is an utter impossibility for a 15th century expedition.
It's geographically absurd. It makes no sense. And critics, starting way back with Bartolomé de las Casas in the 16th century, they immediately suspected that the writer of this letter, whether it was Vespucci himself or a publisher looking to sell copies, was trying to retrofit authentic geographical observations from later voyages into a fictitious timeline.
All to establish that crucial first claim.
Exactly. And the final nail in the coffin for most historians is that the authentic private letters that Vespucci wrote, the ones we generally accept as genuine, they make absolutely no mention of a 1497 voyage.
So the consensus is that the 1497 voyage is a literary construction designed to secure primacy over Columbus.
That's the prevailing view, yes.
Okay, so let's move on to the first trip that is confirmed by Spanish records. Voyage 2, the 1499-1500 Spanish expedition.
This one is rock solid. We have records. Vespucci joined an expedition licensed by the Spanish crown. He wasn't the overall leader, though. That was a man named Alonso de Ojeda.
And the chief navigator?
Juan de la Cosa, a highly skilled cartographer who'd actually sailed with Columbus.
So this was a serious crew. And what was Vespucci's role?
Critically, he was both a financier and a technical participant. He and his backers financed 2 of the 4 ships in the fleet. And Ojeda himself later testified that Vespucci served as one of his pilots.
So that confirms his technical, hands-on role in navigation. What was their objective? What were they looking for?
Well, the goal was exploration and resource exploitation. Columbus's 3rd voyage had come back with reports of vast amounts of pearls on the coast of a massive landmass to the south.
So Ojeda was looking for pearls.
He was looking for pearls, and he was charting this new coast. They reached South America somewhere near present-day Suriname or French Guiana.
And this is the voyage that shows Vespucci's independent ambition, right? It suggests he was much more than just a subordinate pilot.
He certainly was. At some point, the fleet split. Ojeda sailed northwest toward modern Venezuela, but Vespucci took his 2 ships and headed south.
Why south?
You have to remember, the intellectual assumption was still that this was the coast of Asia. Vespucci's goal was profound. He hoped to round the unidentified Cape of Catagara, which was a theoretical feature from Ptolemy's ancient geography.
And if he could do that?
He would reach the Indian Ocean. He was trying to intellectually disprove or confirm classical cosmology with his own ship.
That is incredibly ambitious. And that ambition led to some truly astounding geographical findings, didn't it? Especially about the scale of this new continent.
It did. His report details the sheer scale of the freshwater outflow from the Amazon and the Para rivers. He noted that they poured so much freshwater into the Atlantic that it extended 25 miles, or 40 kilometers, out to sea.
Wait, 40 kilometers of freshwater extending into the ocean?
Exactly. Imagine seeing that. That's not an island or some simple coastal feature. That volume of water must have signaled to him immediately the sheer continental scale of the landmass that was draining into the Atlantic.
But his big mission, his attempt to round the continent and find that Cape of Catagara, was unsuccessful.
It was thwarted by nature. They continued south for about 40 leagues, roughly 240 kilometers, but they encountered this massive, relentless, adverse current that they just couldn't sail against. They were forced to turn back.
So where did they go from there?
They sailed north along the Venezuelan coast, possibly rejoining Ojeda before heading up into the Caribbean.
And the end of this particular voyage carries a dark but necessary reminder of the commercial realities we were just talking about.
Absolutely. Before sailing back to Spain, they stopped in Hispaniola to repair their ships and get supplies, and to recoup some of the massive investment and, offset the financial risks from the whole Berardi venture.
They went on a slave raid.
They did. A brief, brutal slave raid in the Bahamas. They captured 232 Lucayans, who they then brought back to Spain to sell.
It's a brutal coda that reminds you these were commercial ventures financed by blood and gold. But those same ships were also carrying the seeds of a profound intellectual realization about the shape of the world.
It's the central tension of the entire era.
Okay, now let's pivot to Voyage 3. This is the second confirmed trip, but this time he's working for Spain's great rival.
Yes, the 1501-1502 Portuguese Commission.
This is a critical geopolitical pivot. Why did Portugal hire him?
King Manuel I of Portugal hired Vespucci specifically to conduct a strategic survey. The reason was, in 1500, a Portuguese explorer named Pedro Álvares Cabral had unexpectedly stumbled upon a massive landmass, what we now call Brazil, on his way to India.
He was blown off course, right?
Exactly. And suddenly Portugal urgently needed to know the extent of this new land, and crucially, where it fell in relation to the invisible line set by the Treaty of Tordesillas.
Ah, Tordesillas. For anyone listening, just give us a quick refresher on the significance of that line and why Portugal was so anxious about it.
So, the Treaty of Tordesillas, signed back in 1494, established an imaginary line, a meridian 370 leagues west of the Cape Verde Islands. Everything to the west of that line was Spain's. Everything to the east was Portugal's.
And Spain thought they had it all.
The Spanish believed all of the New World fell west of that line. Cabral's discovery suddenly put a huge unknown section of a continental coast potentially on the Portuguese side.
So Vespucci's mission as a pilot under Gonzalo Coelho was basically to sail south and figure out how much of this new land Portugal could legally claim.
That's it exactly. He was there to determine the exact extent and position of this land for Portugal's geopolitical strategy.
That elevates his role from just being a pilot to being a strategic asset.
It does. And on the way, they had this wonderful coincidental moment in history.
What happened?
While they were resupplying at Cape Verde, they encountered Cabral himself on his way home from India, having just completed the very voyage that led to Brazil's accidental discovery.
That's incredible.
It is. And that meeting is documented in one of Vespucci's authentic letters. It just shows you how tightly connected the Portuguese and Spanish spheres of exploration were, despite their intense rivalry.
Okay, so trace the route of this third voyage for us, because this is the one that leads directly to his intellectual breakthrough.
They left Cape Verde, crossed the Atlantic, and reached Brazil on August 17, 1501, at about 6 degrees south latitude. And then they just sailed continuously south, mapping the coast.
What were the first encounters like?
Their initial landings were hostile. They met a group of natives who, according to the reports, killed and consumed one of their crewmen. This led to the first sensational reports of cannibalism that circulated like wildfire back in Europe.
A truly sensational, if horrific, detail that really fueled the early European imagination about the savagery of the New World.
Indeed. But they pressed on. They eventually found friendlier natives and were able to trade. They made it all the way down to 23 degrees south, where they found the bay they named Rio de Janeiro, because they arrived there on January 1st, 1502.
River of January.
Right. Vespucci later claimed they reached as far as 32 degrees south. But more importantly, he was using advanced celestial navigation techniques. He claimed to be the first European to successfully use the Southern Cross constellation for navigating longitude in the Southern Hemisphere.
That technical detail alone confirms his skill. He's navigating a massive, unbroken coast, heading deep into the southern latitudes. This must have completely shattered all the previous assumptions about geography.
It did. This relentless southward journey, mapping thousands of miles of a continental coast that just kept going and going. This is the moment that sets the stage for his global fame. This is where he has the core intellectual insight. This thing is too big to be Asia.
Before we get to that big realization, we should quickly address the alleged fourth voyage, from 1503 to 1504.
Right, the final disputed trip. This was again, purportedly, for the Portuguese crown, exploring the east coast of Brazil. And just like the 1497 voyage, the only source is that sensational Soderini letter.
And the consensus.
Well, Gonzalo Coelho did lead a voyage during this period, but most modern scholars are highly skeptical that Vespucci was on it. There are contradictory dates, missing records, It just doesn't quite add up. Like the first alleged voyage, it seems to serve the narrative of an ultra-experienced pilot who sailed repeatedly to this new land.
So this is the moment. This is when Amerigo Vespucci transitions from being a talented pilot to an intellectual revolutionary. He goes from being a logistics supplier to being the first person to truly define what had been found. That 1501-1502 voyage led directly to his Mundus Novus realization.
The Mundus Novus moment is a staggering intellectual claim. It's a huge leap. Vespucci claimed, based on the sheer scale and the southward extent of the land he'd mapped, that Brazil was not a mere promontory of Asia.
It was something else entirely.
It was part of a fourth continent, previously unknown to Europeans. He called it the New World.
That realization requires such a massive intellectual shift. For 1,500 years, Europe's geographical framework was defined by classical authority. Why was this so revolutionary?
Because it directly shattered the classical consensus, primarily Ptolemy's geography. The prevailing view, since antiquity, was that the world consisted of three continents, Europe, Asia, and Africa. That was it.
And what about the southern hemisphere?
Ptolemy hypothesized that the world's southern hemisphere, if it even contained land at all, was the uninhabitable torrid zone, a region that was just too hot to sustain life or civilization.
So Vespucci sails deep into that supposedly uninhabitable zone, finds a massive temperate continent, and proves the ancients definitively wrong.
Exactly. And his words are revolutionary. He argued that what they had found we should rightly call a new world. He stressed, because our ancestors had no knowledge of them. For this transcends a view held by our ancients, inasmuch as most of them hold that there is no continent to the south beyond the equator.
He's not just observing geography, he's consciously rewriting intellectual history.
He is, and his description of this new land was, well, it was either pure marketing genius or just honest observation, but it was packaged in a way that absolutely captivated Europe.
What did he say?
He described this southern continent as more densely peopled and abounding in animals than are Europe or Asia or Africa. And importantly, he said it had a climate milder and more delightful.
So this wasn't a barren wasteland.
Not at all. This was a paradise waiting to be explored and settled. It was a direct refutation of the classical idea of an uninhabitable southern zone.
But this incredible intellectual discovery only achieved global reach because of a publishing phenomenon, which, ironically, was likely based on fabricated or heavily edited material.
Right. We have to separate the genuine work from the public legend,
His fame rests on the published letters.
which historians now generally believe Vespucci did not write in the form they circulated. They were the product of the new, rapid world of print media, where, unscrupulous publishers would sensationalize genuine private notes just to sell copies.
Okay, let's look at the first viral sensation, Mundus Novus, which was published in 1503.
This letter was ostensibly addressed to his old Medici patron, Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco, and it detailed that revolutionary 1501-1502 Portuguese voyage. Crucially, it was translated very quickly into Latin.
The language of European scholarship.
Exactly. And you have to think of the 16th century printing press as the first vehicle for viral news. It operated at an unprecedented speed.
So how widespread was the dissemination of Mundus Novus?
It was instantaneous and massive. Within just 1 year of its initial Latin publication, 12 distinct editions were printed across Europe. It was rapidly translated into Italian, French, German, and Dutch.
12 editions in 1 year is incredible.
It is. And by 1550, less than 50 years later, at least 50 editions had been issued. This unparalleled dissemination meant that the concept of the New World, the Mundus Novus, became a fundamental, unquestioned part of the European intellectual map. And that concept was inextricably linked to Vespucci's name.
And then came the second letter, the one that causes even more historical trouble. The letter to Soderini from 1505.
This letter, supposedly written to Piero di Tommaso Soderini, the leader of the Florentine Republic, was even more sensational and even more problematic.
Because this is the one that...
This is the letter that definitively asserted Vespucci made 4 voyages, including that impossible 1497 trip. This single document, which claimed Vespucci's primacy over Columbus, is the one that directly inspired the naming of the continent.
So we have 2 wildly popular, likely spurious letters creating his public identity. But what do the authentic manuscripts, the private ones, tell us about his true experiences?
This is where it gets interesting. The most reliable evidence comes from manuscripts that were not published during his lifetime. They were largely accepted as genuine, following the extensive 1924 work by the historian Alberto Magnaghi.
And what do they show?
These letters support the conclusion that Vespucci was a skilled, intellectual observer, but they completely contradict the sensationalized narrative of primacy.
So what were these authentic letters? Can you walk us through them?
Sure, there are three complete letters in a fragment. First, there's the letter from Seville, written in 1500, which details the confirmed 1499-1500 Spanish voyage.
Okay.
Second, the letter from Cape Verde from 1501. This one was written at the very outset of the Portuguese voyage, and it's invaluable because it documents that chance meeting with Cabral. And finally, the letter from Lisbon from 1502, which is a continuation that summarizes the rest of that consequential 1501-1502 journey. It confirms the geographical discoveries that led to the whole Mundus Novus realization.
And the fragment, does it back up the four-voyage story?
No, quite the opposite. The Rodolphi fragment from 1502 refers to 3 voyages, 2 Spanish and 1 Portuguese. This further undermines the 4-voyage claim that you only find in the Soderini letter.
So the genuine notes support 2, maybe 3 trips, and they confirm his crucial role in recognizing the continent. But the public narrative was constructed around a fabricated 4th voyage that was really just intended to steal primacy from Columbus.
That's the shape of it, yeah.
So let's try to synthesize this. A disputed letter, which asserts a false claim of primacy, leaves Seville, travels all the way across Europe, and lands in a small town in France. And this convoluted, almost accidental process results in naming half the globe. How on earth does that happen?
It's the perfect historical accident. It's the right information, however flawed, arriving at the right place at the exact right moment of intellectual ferment.
So where was this right place?
The Soderini letter came to the attention of a group of humanist scholars in Saint-Dié, a town in the Duchy of Lorraine, which was a real hub of classical learning and cartography at the time.
And who were the key players in this group?
The group was led by Walter Led, Matthias Ringmann, and the cartographer Martin Waldseemüller. These men were dedicated cosmographers, and they saw their mission as reconciling ancient geography, Ptolemy, with all these modern discoveries.
So they're trying to make sense of a rapidly changing world map.
Exactly. And in 1506, they get their hands on 2 critical pieces of data. First, a French translation of the Soderini letter, which gives Vespucci all the credit for the independent discovery of the mainland.
And second,
A comprehensive, secret Portuguese maritime map detailing the new Western Atlantic lands. It was likely based on Vespucci's own 1501-1502 survey.
so they had the map showing the physical reality of a massive southern landmass, and they had the text claiming the intellectual discovery belonged to Amerigo.
That's it. Their conclusion was radical, but, within their frame of reference, perfectly logical. This massive landmass was definitively not Asia. It was the New World, or the Antipodes, that classical writers had hypothesized about.
And since Vespucci's name was the one attached to the intellectual revelation, the most widely circulated text,
They assigned the discovery to him.
this confluence of events resulted in the creation of the 1507 Waldseemüller map, which is, in geographical terms, it's priceless.
It's arguably one of the most important maps ever created. In April 1507, Ringmann and Waldseemüller published their Introduction to Cosmography with this massive accompanying world map. They printed 1,000 copies.
Which was a huge number for the
A
time.
vast number. It ensured immediate and widespread influence among scholars, navigators, everyone.
And the map's title itself clearly emphasized Vespucci's contribution.
Oh, absolutely. The full title read, Universal Geography, according to the tradition of Ptolemy, and the contributions of Amerigo Vespucci and others.
Wow. So they put Vespucci right up there next to Ptolemy, the ultimate authority.
They did. And right there on the South American landmass, for the very first time in print, was the name America.
Let's talk about the specific rationale for that name. It's often overlooked that they specifically wanted a feminine Latinate name for it.
Right. Ringmann, who wrote the text that accompanied the map, he articulated the reasoning perfectly. He wrote, I see no reason why anyone could properly disapprove of a name derived from that of Amerigo, the discoverer. A suitable form would be a marriage, meaning land of Amerigo, or America, since Europe and Asia have received women's names.
That's a powerful insight. They were consciously following the classical tradition of giving continents feminine names. Terra Europae, Terra Asia.
They just adapted Amerigo into the Latin feminine form, America.
And because of the quality and the reach of that Waldseemüller map and the introduction, the name was secured almost instantly.
It was a massive success. 4 editions printed in the first year alone. It just rapidly infiltrated European intellectual circles.
And once that name is on the map, it's practically impossible to take it off.
Indeed. The tradition was solidified a generation later, in 1538, when the great cartographer Gerardus Mercator, on his own hugely influential world map, used America to name both the North and the South continents.
And that secured it.
That usage propagated the name globally through the most trusted, authoritative means of geographical knowledge.
But the irony is almost unbearable. The very cartographer who bestowed this immortal honor, Waldseemüller, appears to have retracted it later on.
He did, which suggests the political and historical backlash over Columbus's stolen credit was intense. Just 6 years later, in 1513, Waldseemüller published a new map.
And what did that one show?
On this new map, he labeled the New World Terra Incognita, or Unknown Land, and he specifically named Columbus as the discoverer. It was a silent retraction, an acknowledgement that the growing sentiment was that Vespucci's claim to primacy was questionable.
But by 1513, the name America was already out of the bottle.
Far too late. The power of that initial print run, the prestige in the German scholars, the clear rationale for a feminine name, it had all secured the legacy. And the final irony. Vespucci likely died in 1512, before Waldseemüller's retraction, and possibly completely unaware of the monumental honor that had been bestowed upon him by a cartographer in France.
He achieved immortal fame from a document he may not have even written, while pursuing objectives he probably never realized. Incredible. So while this whole naming debate was raging across Europe, Vespucci himself had settled back into a position of real respect and authority in Seville.
He had, and his service to the rival Portuguese crown didn't seem to hurt his standing with King Ferdinand of Spain one bit.
Why not? You'd think that would be a problem.
Ferdinand was a pragmatist. He needed knowledge and expertise above all else. Vespucci was a man who had deep, first-hand experience navigating the massive, complex South American coast, and he was a trained cosmographer. He was valuable.
So Ferdinand brings him back into the fold.
In early 1505, the king summoned him to consult on navigation matters. And then, crucially, in April, he was declared a citizen of Castile and Leon, which cemented his position as a loyal subject of the crown.
And then, in 1508, he received the appointment that really confirms his true administrative genius. He was named the Piloto Mayor,
the master navigator for Spain's Casa de Contratación.
And this was not a minor title. This was a role of immense national importance.
It was huge. He held that post until his death in 1512. And the appointment confirms that Spain recognized his abilities, totally divorcing his professional standing from any of the scandalous claims being made in those published letters. He wasn't just a merchant or a pilot anymore. He was a state authority, an administrator of Spain's entire global enterprise.
Let's spend a moment on the Casa de Contratación. What was its power, and why was Vespucci's appointment to its highest technical position so significant for a foreign merchant?
The Casa de Contratación, or House of Trade, was essentially the royal monopoly that controlled all of Spain's overseas commerce, navigation, and colonization.
So everything.
Everything. It was responsible for collecting taxes, licensing ships, regulating trade routes, and most importantly, gathering and centralizing all geographical knowledge. For a Florentine immigrant to be placed in charge of the knowledge base of the Spanish Empire, it just speaks volumes about his expertise and his trustworthiness.
And his role as Piloto Mayor came with two immense responsibilities that really defined his lasting administrative contribution.
Yes. The first was quality control. He was responsible for licensing and ensuring that all of the ship's pilots were adequately trained and certified before they were allowed to sail to the New World.
So he was basically running the pilot academy for the entire empire.
In a way, yes. He was ensuring competence and reducing the loss of life in cargo. But his second task was even more vital to the Spanish Empire.
Which was?
Compiling the Padrón Real,
the royal model map.
The official, continuously updated, secret master map of the entire Spanish Empire. Every single pilot returning from the New World was legally obligated to report their findings, new coastlines, new currents, hazards, islands, directly to the Piloto Mayor.
And Vespucci's job was to synthesize all of that intelligence into a single, authoritative national map.
A map that was the crown's most valuable piece of intellectual property. This system of knowledge centralization, which Vespucci established, is what cemented Spain's maritime dominance for decades to come.
He died in office on February 22, 1512. He left a modest estate, which included 5 household slaves, to his wife Maria, but his lasting legacy was really administrative and intellectual.
Which brings us full circle to the enduring Vespucci question. The intense debate over his true accomplishments has made him, as one source puts it, the most enigmatic and controversial figure in early American history.
And we've touched on the early critics, especially those devoted to Columbus's legacy, who felt that Vespucci had just plain stolen the honor, and they did not mince words.
No, they were vicious. Bartolomé de las Casas, the famous Dominican friar and chronicler, spent years arguing that Vespucci was a flat-out liar who fabricated the 1497 voyage specifically to undermine Columbus.
But the most memorable attack, the one everyone quotes, came centuries later from Ralph Waldo Emerson in 1856.
Right. Emerson famously dismissed Vespucci as a mere thief and a pickle dealer from Seville who managed to get half the world baptized with his dishonest name.
Pickle dealer, of course, referring to his days as a ship chandler, supplying salted provisions. That's just such harsh rhetoric, but it shows how potent the controversy remained, even centuries later.
It does. And for 100 years, it framed the debate as a very simple choice. You had the genius discoverer, Columbus, and you had the publishing charlatan, Vespucci. But modern scholarship has worked very hard to move past that simple dichotomy.
And the turning point in that modern synthesis really came in 1924 with the work of Alberto Magnaghi.
Magnaghi conducted the most exhaustive review of all the existing records and manuscripts. His major contribution was the influential two-voyage thesis,
Which argued
that the only authentic trips were the two confirmed ones, the Spanish voyage of 1499-1500 and the Portuguese voyage of 1501-1502. Crucially, he denied Vespucci's authorship of the two sensationally published letters, Mundus Novus and Soderini.
And who did he blame?
He believed they were fabricated by unscrupulous Florentine publishers who were just combining various legitimate accounts to create a bestseller.
So Magnaghi essentially salvaged Vespucci's reputation as an authentic, high-quality pilot and cosmographer while absolving him of the scandalous claims of stealing Columbus's thunder.
That was the intent. But of course, not every historian agreed. For example, Roberto Leveille, an Argentinian historian, later endorsed the authenticity of all four letters and supported the most extensive itinerary possible.
So the debate continued.
It just shows how difficult it is to achieve consensus when you're dealing with primary sources that are fundamentally contradictory and potentially compromised by a profit motive.
So where does the most recent academic synthesis land on the man who named a continent?
Well, the historian Felipe Fernandez Armesto, writing in 2007, suggests the question of authorship is ultimately inconclusive.
Okay.
He affirms that the third voyage, the Portuguese one from 1501-1502, is unassailable and absolutely crucial. He argues the first alleged voyage was likely just a distorted or misplaced version of the second, and the fourth is probably true.
So a bit of a mix.
It is. The consensus that remains today is that Vespucci's true importance rests less on claiming the first physical discovery and more on the intellectual and public impact of his letters. He was the first person to truly articulate, define, and popularize the concept of a mundus novus in the European public imagination.
He was the intellectual guide, even if his ships weren't the first ones there.
He was the publicist and the scientist who shattered the ancient consensus.
So we've seen the sheer complexity and, well, the irony of this monumental figure. Amerigo Vespucci, an Italian merchant, a sophisticated administrator for both Spain and Portugal, becomes the namesake of two continents.
All thanks to disputed letters and the classical sensibilities of German cartographers working in France.
It is an amazing story of intellectual influence overriding chronological fact.
It's a profound monument, not just to the era of geographical discovery, but to the speed and the power of the printing press, the rise of a kind of celebrity culture, and the editorial decisions made by humanists who were just trying to reconcile their ancient knowledge with the baffling reality of this new world.
He sold the idea of America before most Europeans even knew where it was.
He did. And his greatest intellectual contribution was that mundus novus moment. His descriptions of a massive, densely peopled and mild southern continent, they shattered the ancient consensus that the southern hemisphere was an uninhabitable torrid zone. That intellectual leap redefined the known world for Europeans almost overnight.
Which leads us to a fascinating final thought for you to consider, based on everything we've unpacked today.
The entire geographical framework of the world was overturned, because one single, widely circulated observation, even a controversial one built on shaky evidence, gained traction at a critical moment of change.
So considering the rapid global circulation of information today,
what deep-seated scientific or geographical assumptions that we hold right now might a single, widely circulated observation, even a controversial one, be poised to completely overturn next? The world is always open to redefinition, especially when the printing press is running hot.